Mary Collins, a devoted nun from Ohio, abandoned her vows to follow businessman David Miller to Cairo. His wife, Rebecca, burned with fury, while cousin Thomas Gray watched from the shadows, taking notes on every move. Only Anna Miller, David's sister, showed kindness, yet she carried a secret that could destroy them all. 2 months later, Mary was gone, her suitcase missing, her Bible left open on the bed with a single word, "Forgive." What happened in those weeks became a haunting mystery of love, betrayal, and a disappearance no one dared to investigate. Sister Mary Collins had always been a figure of calm devotion in her small Ohio town. Those who knew her described her as gentle, disciplined, and unwavering in her faith. She had spent years inside the convent walls, following a predictable routine of prayer, service, and silence. To outsiders, it seemed impossible that such a woman would ever abandon her vows. That is why her sudden disappearance shocked both her fellow sisters and the community around them. The first signs appeared on a quiet morning when Mary failed to arrive for prayer. At first, the sisters thought she was ill, but by midday, her absence grew alarming. When they entered her room, they found her bed neatly made, her closet nearly empty, and her suitcase gone. On the small wooden nightstand, there was only a folded piece of paper with 3 haunting words, "I must go." What the convent did not know was that Mary had been drawn into a secret world months earlier. During a charity event in the city, she met David Miller, a wealthy businessman with a magnetic personality. Though married, David had a way of speaking that made Mary feel seen in ways she never had before. Their connection began as casual conversation but quickly deepened into late-night letters and whispered phone calls. For Mary, it was intoxicating, both forbidden and irresistible. As her feelings grew, the weight of guilt pressed heavily on her. Yet David painted a vivid picture of a different life, one filled with passion and adventure beyond the convent walls. Finally, she made her choice. Packing lightly, she carried her Bible as her only comfort and boarded a flight bound for Cairo. What awaited her there would prove far more dangerous than she ever imagined. David Miller had built a reputation as a man of success and confidence. To the world, he appeared as the perfect image of the American dream. Sharp suits, expensive cars, and business deals that seemed to always go his way. He traveled frequently, splitting his time between offices in New York and Cairo, where lucrative opportunities kept him in constant motion. But behind his polished exterior, David carried a web of secrets he carefully concealed from almost everyone, especially his wife, Rebecca. Rebecca had been married to David for over a decade. At first, she believed their union was strong, built on mutual respect and ambition. Over time, however, she noticed changes. David grew distant, his late nights grew longer, and his explanations became vaguer. She suspected there were other women, but her suspicions had never been confirmed. Still, her instincts told her that her husband's loyalty had fractured long ago. When Rebecca discovered Mary Collins had left the convent and followed David to Cairo, the shock cut deep. The betrayal was not only emotional, but humiliating. To know her husband had entangled himself with a nun, a woman who had once pledged her entire life to God, was almost beyond comprehension. It was a story that, if made public, could destroy them both. David, however, felt no shame. He saw Mary's devotion as a testament to his own charm and influence. He had convinced her to abandon a sacred life and pursue him across continents. To him, it was proof of his power. But his arrogance blinded him to the storm brewing at home. Rebecca's suspicion was turning into fury, and while David enjoyed the thrill of his secret romance, he failed to see that every step he took was leading both women closer to danger. When Mary Collins stepped off the plane in Cairo, the air itself seemed to press down on her. The noise, the heat, and the unfamiliar rhythm of the city overwhelmed her senses. She clutched her single suitcase in one hand and her Bible in the other, silently repeating prayers to calm her nerves. David had promised that everything would be arranged, that she would be safe, and that this new life would be the beginning of something extraordinary. What she found instead was loneliness wrapped in chaos. The apartment David secured for her sat in a bustling neighborhood filled with narrow streets, crowded markets, and endless sounds of car horns. To locals, Mary stood out instantly. Her pale skin, conservative clothing, and uncertain steps marked her as foreign. Neighbors gossiped quietly about the strange woman who never seemed to belong. Some pitied her, others mistrusted her, and a few simply ignored her. David visited occasionally, always rushing, always claiming to be busy with work. He brought gifts, jewelry, flowers, small luxuries, but his presence was fleeting. Most days, Mary sat alone by the window, staring at the swirl of life in the streets below. She tried to keep her faith alive, spending hours reading her Bible, but doubt crept in steadily. She had given up her convent, her community, and her vows, only to be left waiting in an unfamiliar city. At night, the city grew louder, and shadows stretched across her small apartment. She sometimes thought she saw people watching her from across the street, lingering just a little too long. Whether it was paranoia or reality, she could not tell. Each day that passed without David by her side made her feel more like a ghost in a place that was never meant to be her home. Unbeknownst to Mary, her every move was being observed from the shadows. Rebecca, still seething with betrayal, had confided in her cousin Thomas Gray, a man with a reputation for finding out what others tried to hide. Though not a licensed investigator, Thomas had the instincts of one, sharp-eyed, calculating, and patient. He agreed to watch Mary, but his motives went beyond simple loyalty. He despised David for years, envying his success, and this scandal gave him an opportunity to tighten control over both David and Mary. Thomas rented a room across the street from Mary's apartment. From there, he tracked her daily habits with unsettling precision. He noted when she left, when she returned, and even which lights she switched on at night. To him, Mary was not a woman in love, but a pawn, someone who had wandered into a dangerous game without realizing the rules. He began keeping a small notebook filled with times, dates, and observations, creating a record of her existence that Mary herself would never have imagined. Mary remained unaware, though sometimes she felt uneasy, as if unseen eyes were fixed on her. She dismissed the feeling as homesickness, or perhaps fear of living in a foreign city. Yet the truth was far more sinister. Every step she took, every prayer she whispered by the window, was being documented. Rebecca, meanwhile, grew restless waiting for updates. She wanted proof, something tangible to justify her growing anger. But Thomas rarely shared everything with her. He kept certain details for himself, feeding her just enough to maintain her trust while pursuing his own agenda. For Thomas, this was no longer about protecting family honor. It was about control, power, and the dangerous satisfaction of watching lives unravel from the shadows. The first weeks in Cairo had filled Mary Collins with hope, but as time slipped by, that hope began to crack. David's visits grew shorter, sometimes only lasting an hour before he rushed away with vague promises to return soon. Days passed without phone calls, and when he finally did contact her, his words felt rehearsed, as though he were managing an obligation rather than nurturing a romance. The excitement that had once burned brightly inside her began to fade, replaced by a heavy sense of abandonment. Mary clung to her Bible, holding it as if it were the only anchor keeping her steady. She read long into the night, turning to passages she once taught to others, but the comfort was fleeting. Guilt gnawed at her. Guilt for leaving her vows. Guilt for betraying her sisters. Guilt for falling in love with a man who belonged to someone else. The more she prayed, the more distant God seemed, as if her choice had severed the bond she once relied on. Loneliness deepened in the quiet hours. The streets outside her apartment buzzed with life, but she felt no connection to the city around her. Neighbors eyed her curiously, and whispers followed her in the markets. She began to wonder if she had made the greatest mistake of her life. At times, she thought about returning home, but shame stopped her. What would she say to her convent? To the town that once respected her? To herself? Instead, she stayed, convincing herself that David would eventually prove his love. Yet the silence between his visits grew heavier, and her prayers more desperate. Without realizing it, Mary was slipping further into despair, a shadow of the woman who had once believed love could save her. One afternoon, as Mary returned from a small market near her apartment, a woman approached her with a warm smile. Her name was Anna Miller, and she lived 2 floors below. Unlike the neighbors who whispered or stared, Anna greeted Mary kindly, offering help with her groceries and inviting her inside for tea. Mary accepted cautiously, grateful for a friendly face in a city that felt increasingly unwelcoming. Anna was gentle, soft-spoken, and attentive. She seemed to sense Mary's loneliness almost immediately and began visiting her regularly. Sometimes she brought food, sometimes just conversation. Mary confided bits of her struggle, careful not to reveal everything. But Anna already knew more than Mary could guess. What Mary did not realize was that Anna was David's younger sister. Anna's life had been shaped by years of watching her brother charm, manipulate, and discard people. She admired him once, but had grown wary of his behavior. When she discovered that the quiet American woman living upstairs was the nun he had convinced to abandon her life, she felt torn. Part of her wanted to protect Mary, who seemed so fragile and out of place. Another part feared speaking out, knowing her brother's temper and the influence he held over the family. The bond between the two women grew quickly. Mary began to look forward to Anna's visits, finding in her the companionship she desperately lacked. Yet, for Anna, each encounter carried a heavy weight. She was living in two worlds, comforting Mary while silently guarding a secret that could shatter her. Every time she looked into Mary's trusting eyes, she felt the burden grow heavier. She knew the truth. Mary was entangled in something far more dangerous than she realized, and time was running out. Anna Miller's uneasy balance shattered one night when she overheard voices drifting from her brother's apartment. She had gone there to drop off some documents their mother had sent, but as she approached the door, she froze. Inside, David was speaking with Thomas Gray, their cousin by marriage. Their tones were sharp, low, and urgent. Anna pressed herself against the wall, listening as fragments of conversation spilled into the hallway. She heard words like money, papers, and too risky. Then came the phrase that chilled her. We need to get rid of her. Though no names were spoken, Anna knew instantly who they meant. It had to be Mary. The thought of her brother plotting harm against the vulnerable woman upstairs made Anna's stomach twist. She retreated quietly, her heart racing, terrified that they might discover her eavesdropping. Back in her own apartment, Anna tried to make sense of what she had heard. Could David really be planning something so ruthless? She thought of Mary's fragile faith, her endless waiting, her desperate attempts to hold on to hope. The image of Mary clutching her Bible and whispering prayers played in Anna's mind, and the guilt became unbearable. Yet fear anchored her silence. Speaking out could destroy her family, especially if she accused her brother without proof. Worse, Thomas was unpredictable and cunning. If he suspected Anna knew, she could become a target as well. She wrestled with her conscience, torn between loyalty to blood and compassion for Mary. Every time she visited Mary afterward, the words echoed louder. She smiled, brought food, and listened as Mary spoke of her struggles, but inside, Anna was drowning in dread. She knew danger was closer than Mary could ever imagine, and that knowledge left her powerless and afraid. 2 months after Mary Collins arrived in Cairo, her presence vanished as suddenly as it had begun. One morning, neighbors noticed her apartment door slightly ajar. At first, they assumed she had stepped out, but as hours turned into a full day, whispers began to stir. When someone finally entered, the scene was unsettling. The small space looked undisturbed, yet the atmosphere felt heavy, almost staged. Mary's suitcase was gone, her clothes missing, but on the narrow bed lay her Bible. The Holy Book was open to a passage about forgiveness. Tucked between its pages was a single folded note, written in shaky handwriting. Forgive. The message was brief, cryptic, and haunting. To the neighbors, it seemed like a farewell, though none could say to whom it was directed: God, David, or perhaps herself. No official search began. Mary was a foreigner, alone, without family nearby to demand answers. The landlord shrugged, assuming she had returned to her country. David offered no concern when asked. He told anyone who mentioned her that Mary had realized she made a mistake and left quietly. Rebecca, far away in the United States, repeated the same story, telling friends that the nun had gone back home in shame. But Anna knew better. The night she overheard David and Thomas haunted her now more than ever. She wanted desperately to tell someone what she suspected, but without proof, her words would carry no weight. Worse, she feared her brother's reach. If Mary could disappear without a trace, what would stop the same fate from finding her? The Bible remained, silent and accusing, a relic of the woman who had traded her vows for love. Beyond that, Mary's existence in Cairo had been erased, leaving only questions and unease. When Mary Collins disappeared, no formal investigation was ever launched. In Cairo, missing foreigners were not unheard of, and without family pushing for answers, her case faded before it even began. The local police received no report, no request, no evidence that anything was wrong. To them, she was just another traveler who had come and gone. Rebecca Miller, back in the United States, told anyone who asked that Mary had returned quietly after realizing the mistake she had made. She spoke with calm confidence, as though the scandal had ended and life could resume as normal. Most people believed her, never questioning the details. For Rebecca, the lie provided a shield, covering the humiliation of her husband's affair while protecting the family name. David mirrored this ease. To business associates, he denied any knowledge of Mary's whereabouts, insisting he had not seen her in weeks. His charm and steady demeanor masked the storm beneath. If anyone doubted him, he brushed it off, distracting them with his work. He knew silence was his greatest ally. Thomas Gray kept even quieter. He avoided unnecessary questions, choosing instead to disappear into the background. To Rebecca, he gave short, vague updates, pretending Mary had left the country. But deep down, Thomas relished the control he held, the knowledge that only he and David truly understood what had happened. Anna, however, carried the burden differently. Her conscience weighed heavier each day. She replayed her conversations with Mary, her laughter, her loneliness, her whispered doubts. Now those moments felt like ghosts, pressing down with unbearable guilt. She considered going to the authorities, but knew without evidence her voice would be dismissed. Mary's absence became permanent silence. In a city overflowing with noise, her story vanished into shadows, unspoken and unresolved. Months after Mary Collins vanished, a street vendor scavenging near the edge of the desert stumbled upon a half-burned handbag. Inside were charred scraps of clothing, the blackened frame of a passport, and documents confirming the name, Mary Collins. The discovery reignited whispers, but without a body, no official case was opened. The items were quietly discarded, passed from one pair of hands to another, until they ended up forgotten in a police storeroom. For those who had known Mary, the burned bag raised grim possibilities. Some believed David Miller and Thomas Gray had orchestrated her disappearance, silencing her to preserve David's reputation and protect family honor. Theories spread quietly among neighbors, but fear kept everyone from speaking too loudly. Others suggested Mary had staged her own disappearance, abandoning everything once more to begin a new life somewhere far away. Cairo was vast and unforgiving. She could have simply slipped deeper into its streets, vanishing among strangers. David continued his life without disruption, his charm intact, his business thriving. Rebecca clung to the narrative she had created, protecting her dignity through denial. Thomas remained in the shadows, satisfied that no one could connect him to Mary's fate. But Anna was left haunted. The Bible Mary had left behind became a symbol she could not escape. Whenever she thought of it lying open on the bed, paired with that single word, forgive, she felt the crushing weight of complicity. The truth of what happened to Mary Collins was never proven. All that remained was a burned handbag and a Bible, two fragments of a life swallowed by secrecy and betrayal. In the end, her story was not one of love fulfilled but of devotion misplaced, a cautionary tale erased by silence and fear.